the Humboldt current, the Humboldt lily, the South American Humboldt penguin, the giant Humboldt squid, several minerals. There's even on the moon, the Mar Humboldtorium, named after Alexander. In fact, there's more places named after him than anybody else. Dozens of monuments, parks, mountains throughout Latin America, towns in Argentina, a river in Brazil, geysers in Ecuador, a bay in Colombia, rivers and waterfalls, parks, etc. And of course, our own county, Humboldt County. There's 13 towns, our famous Redwood National Parks. There's parks throughout Chicago and Buffalo named after him. And the state of Nevada was also being considered to be named Humboldt. A few years ago when I visited Cuba, I had the pleasure of getting to explore the Humboldt National Park in the northeastern region of the island, which was an extremely biodiverse area. And I spent a lot of time thinking of what Humboldt would have been thinking as he explored the plants and animals there. I'm not sure why there's those lines there. Alexander von Humboldt gave up a life of privilege to discover how the world worked. He wrote over 50,000 letters and received twice that many. His knowledge was to be shared, he believed, and exchanged freely. One of his greatest gifts was helping to democratize science and making it accessible to all, including to women and people of lower economic status. Yet he lived a life of contradictions. He was a chamberlain to two Parisian kings, though he believed deeply in equality for all and not in a monarchy. He was confident, yet always sought approval. He was hugely famous. He was even called the most famous man after Napoleon. He was a very successful writer. People would even bribe bookstores and publishers to get his books early. Yet he died poor. His relationship with nature was based on science and senses of emotions. He wanted to excite in people a deep love of nature. He believed, quote, "Nature needs to be experienced through the feeling." He had a photographic memory and could recall the smallest details from many years and many continents away. His drive at the core was to discover how life worked and its interconnectedness, and this greatly influenced his travels in South America and throughout his life. Quote, "In a great chain of causes and effects, no single fact can be considered in isolation." His intimate love for nature fed his soul. He said, "The mere communion with nature, mere contact with the free air, exercise a soothing yet comforting and strengthening influence on the wearied mind, calm the storm of passion, and soften the heart when shaken by sorrow at its innermost depths." However, Humboldt was 30 before he could set out for his distant lands. He suffered his whole life from what Germans called Fernweh, a deep drive for the unknown. He had a deep wanderlust for travel and knowledge and discovery. This drive led him to perpetually jump from subject to subject. People worried he would overwork his brain. He finished in 8 months in university what others did in 3 years. He became a mining inspector at the age of 22 and invented lighting and breathing apparatuses and started a school to lead to better working conditions for miners. He and his brother Wilhelm hung in tight social circles with some of Europeans' most enlightened thinkers of the time. Here they appear with Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Germany's greatest poet, who said spending a few days with Humboldt was like having lived several years. And in 8 days of reading books, one could not learn so much as giving him an hour. Greatly influenced by each other, for Goth's Faust character greatly resembled Alexander, and Goth gave Alexander what he called new organs through which to see and understand the natural world. This had profound influence on Alexander's travels through South America. But he was a dutiful son and quelled his desperate desire for travel of the world until his mother passed when he was in his late 20s. This gave him an inheritance to buy his equipment and a means for which to travel. He spent much time traveling throughout Europe, buying the latest equipment and testing it out in all the environments that he could. I offer this image from the museum in Hamburg that I visited this September to show on the left what Alexander's outfits were like that he scaled giant volcanoes in the Andes in, compared to what an explorer of today might wear. However, like many times in his life, war and political upheaval thwarted his travel plans. It took a few years after his mother's death before he could finally gain permission from the King of Spain to travel, and with it, a passport with great freedom to the New World. These are the maps of some of his travels throughout the 5 years of his Latin America adventures. Finally, he and the botanist colleague, Amy Bonpland, left on one of the greatest adventures ever, which changed the way people related to the planet. I could spend the entire time of this talk just sharing the scientific discoveries that Humboldt and his team offered, but instead, I will just give you a few of the highlights. He discovered isotherms, the temperature and barometric pressure lines that we use on weather maps today. He characterized plants by location, climatic zones, not just narrow scientific categories. He saw nature as a global force with corresponding climatic zones across continents, which radically shapes the understanding of ecosystems. He discovered the magnetic equator, 7 degrees below the geographic one, or 500 miles south. He found connections everywhere and described the web of life, including its vulnerabilities. He was the first to explain forest's ability to enrich the atmosphere with moisture and its cooling effects, water retention, and protection against soil erosion that forests offered. He discovered that volcanoes were connected beneath the earth. When he and Bonpland visited Lake Valencia in Venezuela, he became the first to talk about human-induced climate change, and this was in the year 1800. Monocropping of indigo led to clear cutting and the draining of waterways to feed the crops and drain the wetlands. This, within just a few years, was greatly affecting the climate of the area. Humboldt was the first to speak not only of he was the first to speak of clear cutting of forest as an environmental issue, not just an economic issue. He noticed that excessive clear cuttings of the forest for timber and fuel during his mining inspecting days, and he made suggestions of how to use less wood. He noticed on his travels through South America, Spanish monks taking all the turtle eggs and unchecked pearl harvests off of Ecuador and Venezuela that were leading to depleted stocks of the oysters. The Spanish had stripped the, I don't know how to say this correctly, the chinichana tree or its quinine, to fight against malaria. He wrote of the human impact on the environment everywhere he went, and the social impacts that it had as well. He took great time to discover the knowledge and wisdom from the indigenous people where he traveled and their languages, and he held them in the highest regard for their intellect and their long historical social structures. It was a big mission of Humboldt and Bonpland to prove that there was a natural waterway between the Great Orinoco and the Amazon water basins. They made detailed maps of the systems and the tributaries, far better than those that had been produced beforehand, that he said were so off that they could have been made in Madrid. He risked his life continuously with crocodiles, relentless mosquitoes, jaguars, and many other dangers in this land where few white men had ever ventured. But in the end, they did prove that the two great waterways did connect. While crossing the Llanos Plain in present-day Venezuela and Colombia, he deducted the theory of keystone species through the Murita palm. This was 200 years before the term of keystone species was coined by others. He called it the tree of life, symbolizing nature as a living organism with so many other species connected to it that this one tree for their survival. Many plants and animal species would be lost if this tree was removed from the ecosystem, much like an arch will collapse if a keystone brick is removed. The team traveled over 1,000 miles through the rugged Andes with all their heavy equipment and previously collected specimens, sometimes on trails that were only inches wide, and with heavy instruments in hundreds of thousands of feet that they ascended. He would get out his instruments every few hundred feet to do his testing, to boil water to see its boiling points, to test the atmosphere, to test the blueness of the sky. He was relentless and really obsessed with taking as many scientific data as he could. They suffered extreme altitude sickness, including bleeding gums, nausea, dizziness, frozen hands and feet. But yet, he was on a mission. Although he had climbed more mountains than anybody else and was the most accomplished mountaineer of his time, his eye was on the prize of Chimborazo. It was believed to be the tallest mountain at the time, and on June 23rd of 1802, he climbed 19,413 feet. They were less than 1,000 feet below the peak, but were not able to finish due to a giant crevice that separated them from the peak. However, they had climbed higher than any person had ever been, including in hot air balloons. His viewpoint from the top of this mountain gave him a different way to see the world. He remembered all the mountains he had climbed around the world, and the plants he had seen there, and the measurements he had taken, and suddenly everything fell into place. With this new perspective, it led him to create the masterpiece Naturgemälde, which is an untranslatable from Germany, but essentially means painting of nature, yet implying unity and a wholeness. The sketch that he drew during his travels here, then later turned into a 3 by 2 foot long drawing, which he displayed in Europe. It depicted nature as this global force with corresponding climatic zones across continents and unity in its variety. This was unprecedented way to show nature, and by simply showing it through visual context. He showed vegetation through the lens of climate and location rather than merely scientific classifications. And this led to our deep understanding of how ecosystems work today and changed the way future generations perceive the natural world. It was his combination of art, science, and the emotional connection to nature that was so unique that Humboldt brought. This is a replication of the large drawing that he did once he returned to Europe, with all of the data and different corresponding plants and altitudes along the sides, truly showing the interconnectedness of nature. It was this perspective of seeing the earth in a new light that led Humboldt to realize nature was one unified force, a living being as he described it, all interconnected, all joined, with each piece of the puzzle a very important part to it. This is much like the Gaia theory that 220 years later was proposed by James Lovelock when the Earth was first viewed from space. Throughout his travels, Humboldt witnessed the destruction of ancient civilizations by Spanish colonialism, seeking gold or timber, either by violence or exchange. His writings offered a vivid picture of this brutality and underpinned it with facts, data, and statistics. Throughout his life, he never stopped talking about slavery as the, quote, greatest of evils. He wrote details of the horrific treatments of slaves and talked about a gross national happiness rather than gross national product. Although he didn't use those terms, he still outlined the concepts. The institution of slavery was unnatural. As he said, what is against nature is unjust, bad, and without validity. He saw that there was no superior or inferior races, much like that of plants of families. Each is adapted differently to their geographical and climatic conditions, but still displayed the common traits. Just as all human beings are in one family, all races are equal, and all are alike designed for freedom. He witnessed great environmental destruction for economic gain in the distant lands, economic gain for those far away in distant lands. Indigo replaced food crops and took over and led to the need for great slavery. Here are some images of the indigo, which was used as dye and still is today. Twice on his travels, Humboldt went to Cuba. First to leave many of his specimens he had collected before, and then later to pick them up. Here he wrote of the monocrops of sugarcane and coffee as a recipe for dependency and injustice, and felt that the problems of the colonies were all due to imprudent activities of the Europeans. He felt that subsistence farmers and small farmers who focused on food crops instead were the key to happiness, health, and a better future for all. After he picked up his collections in Cuba, the team traveled to Philadelphia and to Washington, D.C. to visit Thomas Jefferson, who was president at the time. He and Jefferson had much in common, both thinking that agriculture and agrarian society was the key for a strong, independent culture and country. However, their main disagreement always remained that of slavery. When Humboldt returned to Europe in 1804, he came to a hero's homecoming. He offered free lectures in the greatest halls of Berlin and in Paris, and the cities would be shut down with traffic jams of people trying to attend. He opened it up to women, which was a rarity at the time. He spent many years compiling his research and data from his trips to South America and never stopped trying to travel and discover more. Yet he was always victim to different political mayhem and wars and the closing of borders to him because of this. The East India Tea Company and the British rule over India kept him from being able to ever venture to the Himalayas, where he so desperately wanted to go, to be able to compare their mountain ranges to that he had so greatly explored in the Andes. When he brought back rocks from Chimborazo, they had the fame as the moon rocks did that were brought back by our astronauts. All of his stories were of great impact on people around the world, including in America, where every school textbook throughout the 1800s talked of Humboldt and his great adventures. On his 100th birthday, there was mass celebrations around the world. And yet, again, he became victim of political unrest and political beliefs in the way that he has been, in essence, erased from our from our academic books here in America. The World War IIs and the anti-German sentiment that they brought led to Humboldt and many other great scientists from that part of the world falling from favor. However, he continued his quest for knowledge throughout his life, and though he could not go to the Himalayas, he was able to work out to do a 10,000-mile travel through Russia when he was at the age of 60. Here he was able to explore mountains and mines and even cross into Mongolia for a bit and explore the deep culture there. This is an image taken from the book Invention of Nature that demonstrates they were having to run through areas with great speed as an anthrax outbreak happened during his travel. I find it so interesting as I'm doing research on Humboldt to see the connections from the 1800s to the time that we are living in now. And we'll muse on some of those thoughts in a moment. Humboldt spent much time corresponding with scientists from around the world and did everything he could to help support young minds in their travels and their discoveries, and would often ask people to send their research to him so that he could learn from it. He was known to offer lavish dinners to young scientists while he ate small meals so that he could provide for them. He truly was after as much knowledge as he could to see how not only the world, but the universe worked. And he compiled his opus collection of all of this wisdom into what he called the Cosmos, which was first released in 1845. When these books were released, it was the biggest of deals. And yes, people would bribe bookstores and publishers to try to get early copies so that they could be known as the one who first had their version of Cosmos. The list of people that he influenced could also take up a whole hour to talk about. Henry David Thoreau, Simon Bolivar, who liberated South America from colonial rule, Rachel Carlson's Silent Springs was influenced by his interconnectedness of nature. George Perkins Marsh, who appears here in the upper left, wrote Man and Nature in the early 1860s, which began Americans' conservation movement. Ernest Haskell in the upper right corner coined the term ecology and helped bring Art Nouveau to the European world and created a huge movement of trying to integrate nature into the urban environment, as shown in this middle picture there. Charles Darwin, in our lower right-hand corner, was said that he probably never would have boarded the Beagle had he not been so greatly inspired by Humboldt and his books, and made copious notes in his own copies of Humboldt's writings as they traveled with him on the Beagle. These are just to name a few people. Wendell Berry, in this quote, no doubt was influenced by Humboldt when he said, there is in fact no distinction between the fate of land and the fate of its people. When one is abused, the other suffers. The more I learn about Humboldt, the more I realize how much he has influenced my life. This is me this last September, or actually it was in July that I was here, but this was for his celebrating of his birthday in September at the Natural History Museum in Hamburg. It gave me a greater appreciation for Humboldt's importance of connecting nature and all of life, including the sciences, art, and the imagination. For he truly felt all of these were needed to understand how the world worked. He never stopped talking about the equal rights that people should share and his hate of slavery. He truly cared for the people. He truly cared for the planet and did all he could to get people to be better stewards of it and the resources that were there, knowing that everything played its important role. He truly cared for the future and tried to warn people about the abuse that we lay on nature and the grave effect that it would have for future generations. I highlight these 3 points because these are the 3 core ethics of what is called permaculture. Permaculture is a system of solutions where we use the principles of how nature works, along with the wisdom of indigenous people who have evolved with nature and learning to work with it for millennium, and combine it with appropriate technologies such as solar and wind to create a world today that will work for everybody, both now and in the future. The principles and ethics of permaculture can be applied to all aspects of our life, not just agriculture. This is what led me to help form the Abundant Earth Foundation, so that we could pool our resources and offer money, and other forms of support to people working with these ethics to bring food security around the world. The organization adopted the 501c3 and some board members from what was formerly known as Humboldt Plan It Green. So even my organization has its roots thanks to Humboldt. And this last September, we helped co-sponsor one of the many celebrations around the world honoring Alexander's 250th birthday. In Eureka, we had a wonderful celebration, which also honored some local environmental stewards for their great leadership. Here is Larry Goldberg, who was the founder of Humboldt Planet Green and was on my board of directors for a while for Abundant Earth Foundation. We also had an actor who came and gave speeches as Humboldt, which was actually really cool to think to be there in the same room with Humboldt. With Abundant Earth Foundation, we are now expanding our sphere of influence, not just for Humboldt County, but around the world, to help support people to be those subsistence farmers, to help their communities grow food crops rather than monocrops for profit, but to instead take care of their local communities, and to repair the climate and the environment with regenerative practices. We practice what we call regenerative grassroots philanthropy, offering everybody to be part of the solution by pooling either their financial resources, their wisdom, or other ways that they can help out to help lift everybody up, both in America and throughout Africa, South America, and other places where people need help. Our work today with COVID-19 is really expanding as more and more people are needing food security. We've also worked on how to prepare communities to respond to disaster and to be more resilient before bad situations happen. A big part of this is simply kitchen gardens. My own parents here in McKinleyville have taken out a big part of their lawn so that they could have a larger garden to be able to grow their own food. We are really focusing on a new program called Grow Together, working to help unite youth movements around the world and empower them to focus on growing gardens for food security, so that places that are starting to experience food shortages with COVID-19 can have the food that they need both now and in the future without being dependent on donations from other countries and imports that can so easily be cut off when there is a disaster. Alexander von Humboldt lived such an amazing life, and he lived until he was 90, which especially back then was such a fruitful, long life to live. The ways that he saw nature and spoke so eloquently and poetically about it definitely shaped the way that so many view the world today. It makes me wonder what he would think of our environmental and social and economic problems that we are facing. I know he would still think that small agrarian societies that value all of humans as equal would be the answer. I think that he would see that COVID-19 is truly a sign of how interconnected the world is as one living unit, and that what affects one people somewhere will truly affect those everywhere. And the real interconnectedness that humans are. With COVID-19, we are seeing the unfair effect on people in poorer communities and those who are steering away from science. I'm sure all of this has him turning in his grave. But there is all of the good aspects and the lessons that he shared that we can learn to incorporate into our lives on a daily basis. For those of you who have ever gone to the Parade of All Species in September in downtown Arcata, this is one of the fun ways that we honor Humboldt. This is always done around his birthday and honors the many species that were named after him and how he worked so hard for all species of the planet. Few people know that, but that was, as I understand it, the roots of the Parade of All Species. And I think it's just a great way to get out and celebrate our history and our namesake here in Humboldt. As I mentioned, I use many books as well as PBS documentaries. I'm trying to get some of the other movies that have been made about Humboldt translated because they're all in German right now. But there's a wealth of information and knowledge out there on this amazing man. And I do encourage you to dive deeper, to get bit by this Humboldt bug, to learn all you can about him, and to see how your life has been influenced by him. A lot of my inspiration has come from Andrea Wolf's wonderful book, The Invention of Nature. Some of you may have seen her when she spoke at HSU about 6 or more years ago when the book came out. And as you can tell by my copy, I just love it, and I've read it many times. I feel like Darwin with all the notes I make in the corners of the book of all the fascinating knowledge I am reading and learning about him. I'm even in touch with Andrea to see about making a motion picture about this, because I truly feel that, especially here in North America, to learn these lessons from Humboldt and how we can view the world in a different way, to see the connection between science and nature and our own spiritual well-being, to honor all humans as equal, to honor all life on this planet as equal, that we are all part of this web of life and that we all hold such important components and pieces to it, and that if you pull one strand of the web, it will all fall apart. And that's what we're experiencing right now. And so I truly feel it is up to all of us as individuals and to come together as a collective to help repair this web of life. And so I do hope that we can make this movie to influence even more people and bring this point of view to a greater audience. Andrea, I just want to end by a quote from her. That Alexander von Humboldt's insights to the connection of social, economic, and political issues so closely connected to environmental problems is just as relevant today. And we need to reclaim him as an environmental hero. And that is what I hope we do. That we do not let him become this forgotten father of the environmental movement, and that we truly honor our namesake here in the county and spread this information around the world. So in honor of the great Alexander von Humboldt, I thank you, and that's my presentation. We can now open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Hannah. We really, really appreciate it. And everyone feel free to unmute yourself, and you can raise your hand if you'd want to ask a question, and then Hannah can direct to you.
Let's see, I saw somebody put a hand up. We also have, let's see, I'll just take this from Michael Turek from the chat. He said, my favorite quote from The Invention in Nature. in 1829 when he was 60 years old and on his last expedition traveling across Siberia, which is the image that I showed, Alexander von Humboldt wrote, "Three ways in which the human species was affecting the climate: deforestation and ruthless irrigation, and with the great mass of steam and gas produced in the industrial centers." Yeah, the connections that he saw are just connections that people are still waiting to make today. And what did Humboldt say about climate change? What would his advice be today to us? Asked Rollin Richmond. Thank you, Rollin. So, yeah, when Humboldt visited Lake Valencia in the beginning of his travels to South America, it was seeing the deforestation that was happening, the cutting out of the subsistence farmers of the food that the people were reliant on to plant indigo and other monocrops for the cash benefit of the slaveholders and to benefit back in Spain. And that they were also then affecting the lake level and draining it. And he noticed that this was having an effect on the rainfall. As they were cutting the trees, we need trees to gather the moisture in the air to make clouds to then create rain. This was one of his puzzle pieces he put together. And so especially seeing this, he was the first to write about humans creating climate change. And so his advice to us today, I truly feel would be the same that he gave back then, to look to different practices of agriculture as a means to help regenerate and restore the environment, to not be depleting the soil through our monocropping and the chemicals that we put on industrial agriculture, and that he would be a huge proponent of reforestation, and not only reforesting areas, but also to stop deforestation and to protect the forests that are still around. My family is involved in trying to protect some of the last old growth Douglas fir that is here in the Mattole watershed area at Rainbow Ridge. And so while it's so important to restore deforested areas, we must also really look to preserving what is still there. And so I really think this would be the advice that Humboldt would give us today, and to just realize how interconnected everything is. And climate change that we are seeing at this global scale is such a great example of that. When the Bahamas and Puerto Rico get wiped out by a hurricane, it wasn't necessarily because of something they did, it's because of what's going on in the planet as a whole. So
Thank
Lori,
you for a good answer.
Thanks. Lori Tumas has a question. Lori, would you like to unmute yourself?
Here we go. Well, thank you. I guess you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. So I wonder if you could just touch briefly again, or I don't think you did, on how his expeditions were funded, especially when, I think as you put it, scientists fell from favor politically. That's it.
Yeah. So it wasn't necessarily that scientists fell from favor politically. There was actually, in the early 1800s, science throughout Europe was really highly regarded. And Napoleon was kind of in his own little mini war with Humboldt to get even more scientific data gathered and have a larger collection than him, kind of in a little pissing match. As an ego to make Napoleon feel like he was a better scientist. However, that did not work well, because Humboldt truly was the scientist gathering all of this data. what I meant by that, and then I'll get to answering your question, Humboldt always had problems traveling because of political problems going on, such as wars, especially the Napoleon Wars really closed down a lot of the borders. And he also then had his service to the kings of Prussia that he was serving. And so he did not have the freedom that he would have liked to have been able to travel. And he traveled to England several times trying to get permission to go to the Himalayas, which then India was ruled by England. And after Humboldt came back and wrote especially of the brutality of slavery that he witnessed in Cuba and throughout South America, England did not want to give him permission to go to India, where he would then probably write about the brutality of the people who were suffering there. And so politics really held him back from being able to do even greater discoveries that, who knows, you know, if he had gotten to climb through the Himalayas and then compare those to the Andes, who knows what more he would have found. And so when he was 60 and the Tsar of Russia finally granted him permission for that 10,000-mile journey, it was only with the strict agreement that Humboldt would not write about any of the inhumane treatment that the people of Russia were going through. And that was really hard on Humboldt. That trip, I believe, was funded by the Tsar. His first trip, well, his only trip to South America and the New World was funded by himself and with his inheritance from his mother. He spent years trying to find a king who would grant him permission to travel. And then because of the war with Napoleon, most of the ships were then locked up in navies. And so there wasn't the great exploration happening then. And so it took him a really long time to finally get permission from the King of Spain to grant him the passport, and then to, but that was the caveat that he had to pay for the travel himself. And so that's part of why he was poor throughout his life, is he put all of his money into his travels and his scientific research. So hopefully that gives you a good feel there. I see Jane has a question. How is it that von Humboldt ended up poor? How are you promoting your foundation, and what kind of response are you getting? Okay, the first question, yeah, so how he ended up poor was, like I said, he focused all of his resources on dedicating it to the sciences and to supporting other young scientists and paying for their travels and their lodging. And he never cared about elegance and luxuries or fine suits or fine dining. That was not his thing at all. In fact, he was known to wear the same clothes for many years and show up to big meetings looking pretty disheveled. And while he was on salary with the kings of Prussia for a while, it was never very much money. And so he ended up poor. He fell victim, I think, even though his books, and Cosmos in particular, were so hugely popular around the world, it was the publishers and the bookstore owners and other people who made most of that money. He did not ever become rich off of his fame. He egotistically liked the fame, but never translated into luxuries. And so the question about Abundant Earth Foundation and how we're promoting it, well, I've just brought on a young woman to help me with my social media and our website design, and just trying to get the word out there, because I'm too busy doing the work to have to then be promoting it as well. And yeah, that's been an issue. I haven't done as much promotion because I'm busy doing the work, and I try to go on podcasts, and I write articles for various different magazines as much as I can to get the name and the concept out there. But it's very tricky, and people don't realize how somebody living in Humboldt, how they're connected to somebody living in a small village in South America, and why they would want to make a tax-deductible donation to a foundation like mine to help villages in South America to become more self-sufficient. I'm hoping that with the food shortages that the corona crisis is creating and is going to lead to even greater crises, that people will see this connection between our food security, and that helping people in other countries to become food secure themselves actually is a benefit for us, and especially as we take this more Humboldtian worldview of all of us being interconnected, I hope that more people will help out. The third ethic of permaculture, I did in the slide that it was care for the future. Another way that it is framed is share the abundance. And so that's the core ethic of hold on to what you need to take care of yourself and your family for now and the immediate future, but then any abundance that you have, share with others so that they can raise themselves up and they can become more secure. And I think that's really why Humboldt died poor, is because he helped give away everything he could to help support others. And so, yeah, we're just trying to create a way that people everywhere can help each other out, and to share this knowledge so that you too can grow a more healthy garden and become more food independent yourself, while you're also helping other people in Africa avoid starvation, hopefully. So, how many books did he write, and are they still being studied? All right, Jane, you said you were going to answer some or ask some questions. Great. He wrote a number of books. Yeah, he wrote one before he did his travels on mining and how to make mines safer. And then when he returned, he wrote, and I'm sorry, I needed another day to finish my research. I would wanted to write out all of the different list of books he wrote. He did several looking at his accounts in South America. God, it's escaping me exactly right now. His Views of Nature by Alexander von Humboldt was, before Cosmos was his big book, really explaining this interconnectedness. And then he also did a number of books specifically looking at the political stance, and that got him in trouble and became, yeah, combined science and politics by talking about the horrific things he witnessed around slavery and colonialism. He had a book specifically on Cuba, and then several others. And so I'm sorry I don't have the exact list, but yeah, he's got several books that he did before Cosmos. And yes, they are still being studied, especially over in Europe. I mean, when I was there this last summer, Humboldt is everywhere, and held still as a superhero. And I have, let me see, I'll just grab it if you don't mind here. One of the books I used for my research is this, which is his collected writings, which you can pick up at your local bookstores or order it from them to still help supporting local bookstores during COVID. And so this has excerpts, and I mean, his mind, I have a hard time. I have to read each sentence over and over again because he is just so articulate and so intelligent. But let's see, he wrote, a personal narrative of his travels to the equatorial regions of the new continent, essays on geography of plants, views of nature, which I mentioned, views of monuments of the indigenous people of Americas, a political essay on the island of Cuba, and then Cosmos are just some of them. And so, yeah, this book is a great way to get the whole, not the whole, but some of the collection of his writings. Could you give the name of the museum in Hamburg again? Was the display you visited only for the 100th year celebration, or is it permanent? It was for his 250th birthday that the display was, and yeah, it was up for about 3 months. And let me grab that. I need to ask my German friend to please help me translate some of this, because I got this book here which showed a lot of the display. If you guys want to see this, if you go to speaker view and click that, you're able to see what I'm showing larger. This is the tool that he used for measuring the blueness of the sky. I mean, it's just amazing. And yeah, all of the images of the plants that he collected. So I believe it's well, my German is so bad, I can't say it. The Zoological Museum, I translated as the Natural History Museum in Hamburg. And so that's written down here. If you, but yeah, the display is over. If you want more information or to borrow this or something, I'll put my email again in the chat, and anybody who has further questions or anything, or wants to geek out more on Humboldt with me sometime, I'd be happy to. It's just hannah@abundantearthfoundation.org. Let's see, Kim, are there anybody with their hands up that we should go to in the
I don't think they have their hands up, but there are a couple more questions in the chat.
Yeah, in the chat. Okay. How active is the local permaculture movement? I understand that several local farms are creating CSAs in order to market the produce they normally sell to restaurants. Yeah, you know, it's so interesting to see how we're all adapting to the COVID crisis, and certainly to become as food secure as possible as individuals and a community is just so critical. I'd like to think we're pretty safe here in Humboldt and produce a lot of our food, and to have that happen, we need to be supporting our local farmers as much as possible. So I certainly encourage everybody to join a local CSA, which is a community supported agriculture. And so there is an active permaculture movement here in the area, and I believe even this next week, sometime before the end of May, their next big event is in celebration of CCAT's 50th anniversary on the university campus, which is the Alternative Energy Education Center that also has a lot of permaculture there on the campus. And so I certainly encourage you to check that out on Facebook. There is, if you search Humboldt Permaculture Guild, it should pop up. And so the Facebook group is a great way to find out about monthly meetings and different work parties, so that you can go and see some of the great demonstrations. Because permaculture is different from organic farming in that it is really looking at all of the connections. And that is why I really feel so greatly influenced by Humboldt. It's not just, okay, great, we're growing this here and that there. It's how does everything work together as a whole system? And so you'd be doing rainwater catchment and have solar if you can, but then also be planting plants that either attract good bugs or deter bad bugs. And everything is a piece of the puzzle, and everything plays multiple functions and multiple roles in the system. And so that's why permaculture takes things to a next level than just organic farming, but they're both important. Let's see. So my sister asks a question. Will you reiterate why we didn't learn about him in American books today? Yeah, so why don't we read about Humboldt? Well, a big part of what I have been told and found from my research is, again, because of politics. You know, Humboldt was extremely famous throughout the 1800s. So many places named after him throughout the Americas. On the 100th anniversary of his birthday, there were celebrations all throughout this country. Massive talks, were like 50,000 people showed up in Central Park to hear about him. I mean, he was a hero. But then, especially with World War I and then World War II, all Germans became evil and fell from America as these heroes. And so once again, he fell victim to politics. And, you know, the history books are pretty colonial based and pretty written by white men with very focused viewpoints of the history they want to share. And so I think as over the last century now, as our textbooks have evolved, they've more de-evolved, and we've lost a lot of these important figures in history, especially Humboldt. And, you know, he had this interconnectedness viewpoint and a love of nature that then anybody with more of the Descartes' theory of nature as a mechanism and nature is here to be abused, that it is here for our purposes and our use only, you know, that his viewpoints didn't fit with that. And so again, kind of gets faded out. So I think those are the big part of it. And yeah, once people become ignorant, it's hard to change that. And that's why I think the importance of media and like making movies about him and getting people to read the book. I'm sure all of you would greatly enjoy The Invention of Nature if you haven't read it already. It's just thrilling, and there's so much more to go into that I wasn't able to. But you know, it really makes me wonder then the bigger question of who else has been left out of our history books. You know, Humboldt's just one example, but who else do we not know about, especially women and minorities that were so important that just get overlooked or erased from our history books. And so that's why it's so important for us to learn this knowledge ourselves. Yeah, so hopefully that answers your question well enough, Summer. I know at HSU, like some professors, especially when Andrea came and spoke there were some displays. I was hoping for his 250th anniversary of his birth that HSU would have done a lot more. I'm not sure if some of the professors worked it into their curriculum or not because of that, but and Jane would really like to get the film produced. Thank you. I hope so. And putting together this talk today has helped re-inspire me to want to work with Andrea to do the film. You know, I see Cillian Murphy playing Humboldt or Leonardo DiCaprio or both of them as the Von Claude and Humboldt's team. So that's my big dream. So, and with Leonardo DiCaprio's concern for the environment, you know, I think that he would actually be interested in this. And then this could have such a shockwave around the world to get people to see the interconnectedness and the reverence of all of life that we should have.
Are there any other questions from anybody before we turn Hannah loose and say thank you very, 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 very much? This was wonderful. We appreciate you spending all the time to put this together for us. We've talked about that for months, and we got it together. Now that we're on Zoom, it didn't matter where you are. You were heading toward Australia, if I recall, and backed away and ended up staying here. And I hope it's really productive. And I want to thank all the attendees